On paper, Hitler's last great gamble in the West should have worked. 250,000 men, elite SS panzer divisions in white smocks, artillery timetabled to the minute, bridges rehearsed, traffic control drilled. At 05:30 on December 16, 1944, the guns would rip the American line open. By breakfast, the outposts would be gone. By lunch, German tanks would be drinking American fuel. By nightfall, the spearhead should be 20 miles inland and racing for the Meuse. The staff officers deep in German headquarters could see it all on the map. Pencils tapping, arrows sweeping across Belgium. The northern sector was a gift, a quiet stretch of forest held by a handful of tired infantry and, on one nameless ridge, just 18 men in shallow foxholes. A rest sector, a speed bump. At 9 a.m., a staff officer checks his watch. The lead column should already be rolling past that ridge. At noon, he's on the radio, asking where they are. At 2 p.m., he's redrawing arrows in anger. At dusk, those 18 men are finally overrun and captured, and he thinks they were irrelevant. They weren't. Those few lost hours are about to help wreck the entire timetable of the Ardennes Offensive. Because what the maps in that warm room couldn't show was what actually happened on that ridge. Landlines dead, snow lit orange with muzzle flashes, an INR platoon of 18 men holding off battalions for most of a day, and a winter offensive built on speed bleeding away minute by minute. Early morning, December 16th, still dark in the northern Ardennes. The men of the 99th Division wake up to something nobody expected. At first, there's just a dull, rolling thump in the distance. Sounds like a train coming toward them. Then it hits, all at once. The sound is everywhere. Landlines go dead. Snow lights up orange from muzzle flashes all around. A technical sergeant named Vernon McGarity moves through the smoke toward his squad. An aide man tries to pull him away after shrapnel cuts his arm, but McGarity shakes him off and pushes back. "They're still out there," he says, and goes back into the line. This sector was supposed to be quiet, a rest area, wooded, not heavily defended. Guys had been writing home about how peaceful it was. That peace just exploded. The entire front stretches roughly 100 miles wide, and in just 1 hour of darkness, thousands of shells rain down across the tree lines. It's brutally cold, around 10 degrees, and the air feels like glass in your lungs. Soldiers breathe through scarves just so their teeth don't ache. When the company runner comes by, all he says is, "Hold until you can't," and there's nothing in that sentence to argue with. Over near Lanzerath, 2nd Lieutenant Lyle Bouck Jr. commands an intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, 18 men when they're at full strength. They watch a white field turn to churned-up grey, and beyond the ridge, more than one enemy battalion, hundreds of soldiers, moves into position. 18 men against hundreds. But the angle of the ground is on their side. Bouck keeps his voice level and calm. "Controlled fire, leaders first," he tells them. A field telephone, binoculars, and not much else. The foxholes are shallow, rimmed with frozen earth. When the first group of German infantry breaks into the open, the INR platoon cuts them down in one sweep of fire. Survivors drop flat and try again on the right. Another burst stops them. They attempt the left flank, then push through a hedgerow gap. The platoon's rate of fire becomes the only message that matters. Hour after hour, that ridge keeps telling the Germans, "Not yet, not yet, not yet." Landlines fail, so runners move on foot. Radios die, and a corporal makes a call. The map says one thing, while what soldiers see with their own eyes says something different, and the eyes win. The German plan counts on fog, on roads, on capturing fuel supplies. It never expects 18 men working without orders from above, moving fast, deciding for themselves what needs to happen next. The whole attack was built in darkness behind bad weather. Reconnaissance flights were grounded. German assault groups wore white smocks to blend in. They'd rehearsed the bridging and traffic control for weeks. The first blow shatters everything. Phones are dead, headquarters can't see what's happening, the thin outposts get shoved hard. But then, messengers move on foot. Platoon leaders make decisions without asking permission. Engineers fell trees into roads to block the advance. That redundancy keeps local units alive and fighting. Surprise wins that first hour, but American initiative starts taking back control in the second hour. By midday, the northern shoulder of the defense is buckling, but then it starts to stiffen. Down at Krinkelt Rocherath, a tangle of streets and low stone walls, reports start coming in about tanks. The word gets passed along the line like electricity. Tanks, tanks, tanks. McGarity drags a wounded man across a ditch and into a doorway, then crawls back out into a world of ricochets flying everywhere. Somewhere, a Browning machine gun jams, and McGarity pops the cover with his bare hand and clears the feed with 2 fingers, because gloves are too slow, and time is literally blood at this point. He carries ammunition forward until the clips are gone, and men are cracking open cartridge belts and handing them down the line like they're passing bread around a table. 100 miles of front under attack all at once. 2 days of steady pressure on the northern shoulder. An 18-man platoon delaying what's supposed to be an elite thrust for most of a full day. Temperatures so cold they turn sweat to ice on your body. One guy wrote home, "It was supposed to be quiet." His commanding officer said, "Hold until you can't." Bouck, years later, would describe that day much more simply. He'd say, "We just did our job as long as we could." He thought being captured at dusk meant he'd failed his mission. But the timetable he broke, the plan he actually disrupted, it says something completely different. Staff officers in the rear tap their watches and ask where the column is, where the attack is supposed to be moving to. Somewhere behind the ridge, engines idle, waiting to move. Somewhere else, a captain redraws an arrow on a map, thinking it's simple because a pencil doesn't have to deal with ice and rock and determined men. Up on the ridge, every single inch of ground costs a body and costs an hour. The math is moving the wrong way for the attack plan. The shock has landed. The myth of the quiet sector is shattered. This isn't about a surprise anymore. The story now is about stubborn, determined delay. A machine gunner named Jose Lopez is about to show what one .50 caliber machine gun can do to a street full of men and steel. December 17th, 1944, in Krinkelt, Rocherath. Sergeant Jose Lopez sets up a Browning .50 caliber machine gun on its tripod. The barrel's steaming in the freezing cold. He's short, broad-shouldered, calm. His breath hangs in the air and disappears. The first German wave pours into the street. Lopez squeezes the triggers. The gun tears down the lane. Men fall. Smoke fills everything. You can smell the gunpowder everywhere. A tank starts moving forward, but Lopez doesn't stop. He picks up the entire gun himself, lugs it to a new spot, drags the tripod through the snow. The first position's about to get flanked. From here, another approach gets hammered. Someone yells at him to get down. He stays put. That lane stays shut. 3 different positions in one fight. One machine gun, out in the open, against wave after wave of soldiers with tanks backing them up. Over at Elsenborn Ridge, the ground is higher and harder. Field artillery units have already mapped every approach and set their timing. A forward observer on the radio calls for fire, and batteries miles away pull off something called time on target. Shells leave from different spots at different times, but they all land at exactly the same moment. Infantry in the open have no warning, then everything hits at once. A proximity fuse in each shell reads the air a few meters up and detonates. The air itself becomes shrapnel. Splinters rain down like a steel harvest. Infantry feel it in their faces and shoulders. Tank crews stay locked inside. On December 22nd, just in one sector, those guns fire over 10,000 rounds. The ridge gives the US guns a clear shot and pre-planned kill zones. Time on target means there's no time to dive for cover after the first shells hit. The first ones are the only ones. Proximity fuses turn near misses into deadly clouds of shrapnel. The Germans aren't amateurs. They know tactics, tanks with infantry, smoke screens, coordinated attacks. But on ground that's already marked and registered, every push walks straight into a trap. December 21st, just outside Malmedy, Sergeant Francis Curry hears an MG-42 rattle and a tank's tracks clanking. 5 Americans are pinned in a building across a small factory yard. Curry's 19 and carrying a bazooka. His rocket hits near the tank. The crew bails out. Rifle grenades follow. Then he runs across the yard under fire, close enough to feel the air move when machine gun rounds snap past his head. He reaches that building and drags the 5 Americans out, one at a time, pulling them through a door frame that's falling apart from bullets. He moves because there's a way through. This isn't unusual. Squads and small teams make whole roads impossible for the Germans to use. Military police redirect traffic away from the fighting. Engineers fell trees and mine the intersections. Tank destroyers set up in alleys where their long guns matter. The Germans aren't stupid. They're good at this war. They infiltrate in white camouflage, rush the crossroads, attack at night. But minutes slip away. At Lanzerath, Krinkelt, Malmedy, every choke point, minutes disappear. Doubt creeps into the radio reports. Delayed, heavy resistance, fuel running low. Schedules fall apart. Lopez shouts to a loader he can barely see through the smoke. Keep it fed! A forward observer's voice is tight on the radio. They're piling up on the road. When someone asks Curry why he ran across that yard under fire, he says, they were ours. One town against multiple divisions. Bastogne's 10-kilometer defense will hold for a week under constant attack. The front that exploded on the 16th is still 100 miles wide, but the real fight comes down to streets and fields that matter. On the 22nd, the same day one slice of Elsenborn fires over 10,000 shells, a typed surrender demand crosses no man's land toward Bastogne. The answer is one word. Trucks jam bumper to bumper on forest roads made for sleighs. A panzer burns fuel sitting still while a stuck half-track gets a tow. An officer who once demanded speed now needs a shovel and a rope. Competence meets reality, and reality wins. Small decisions become strategy. Fires get planned. Roads become weapons. Squads control where an entire army goes. The typed demand arrives. In a candlelit basement, a medic and a nurse hear the answer and keep doing what they've been doing, keeping men alive. December 20th to 22nd. Down in Bastogne, everything stays wet. Candles flicker in the cellars, leaving dark streaks of smoke on the stone walls. A medic named Rowe moves from one wounded soldier to the next, his hands already raw from cold and disinfectant. He keeps his voice quiet, telling each man the same thing over and over. You're okay. Breathe. I've got you. One day someone passes around a piece of paper that's been folded and refolded so many times, the creases are dark with grease. Someone reads it out loud. Nuts. A couple of the guys laugh, even though it pulls at their wounds. One groans. The word sits in your mouth like a piece of hard candy. Augusta Chewy came to visit family and decided to stay and help. She speaks both French and English, so she translates between an American soldier, an old Belgian woman, and a surgeon in a green coat. On the 24th, a bomb hits the aid station on Rue Neufchâteau. René Lemaire, who'd been there every day, dies in the explosion. Chewy gets thrown through a doorway and gets up shaking dust from her hair. She stands, walks toward the sounds of pain and the hands reaching for her coat. Later, when someone asks why she didn't leave, she just says, I did what I had to do. The aid stations were packed into the town because every minute counts. A forward post can save lives that a hospital farther back can't reach. So cellars and shops became medical stations, close enough to carry a wounded man quickly, but spread out enough that one direct hit wouldn't destroy everything. When the weather cleared, supply drops came. Parachutes opened over town, and crates hit the snow. Sometimes they landed on the wrong side, burst apart, and scattered blankets across the roads. Getting people out depended on narrow windows of opportunity. A corridor would open, and ambulances, half-tracks, and trucks packed with straw would make their runs. When it closed back up, everyone held their breath. After the 26th, that breath came back in the form of tank treads and headlights. Late afternoon on the 26th. First comes a grinding, whining sound. Then a tank. A big jumbo Sherman called Cobra King, its gun pointing down a street lined with broken windows. First Lieutenant Charles Boggis squints into the weak winter light. Paratroopers in dirty jackets step out of doorways and wave. Someone puts their hand on the tank's armor the way you touch a car that just brought your friend home from the hospital. Roe and Chewie come up out of their cellar for the first time in hours and watch the turret roll past. Then head back down because now they can start moving patients. A ring about 6 miles across held for a week. The cold didn't let up for anyone. Relief that most people thought wouldn't come broke through on the 26th. The next morning, fresh footprints cut across the snow, bigger ones, and tank tracks lead to the aid posts. The town lets out a breath but doesn't celebrate. It just gets back to work. Morphine's running low, a medic says, and someone nods and says, half doses. And that's what goes in the charts, and somehow more men live. Nuts, the paper said, and men repeat it like a password they'd chosen themselves. A German messenger tries to get back through the ring he'd crossed to leave and realizes it's sealed shut. Word travels up the chain that a one-word answer has actually held the line. The ring doesn't break because some general was brilliant. It breaks because the math worked out differently. A tank showed up when it needed to. A corridor opened at the right moment. A nurse had a steady hand. A medic had tape in his pocket. The siege starts to loosen. Fuel is already running low. A schedule on paper is turning into a line of abandoned vehicles rusting in the woods ahead. December 26th to 28th. Out near Elsenborn, the German assault groups are throwing everything at the line again. They're running into the same artillery barrage as yesterday, coordinated batteries that turn a quiet field into pure chaos in seconds. The snow is torn up with footprints and blackened by shell impacts. That whole northern shoulder just isn't giving an inch. Further south, the roads tell a different story. There's a Panzer nose first in a ditch because the driver hit a soft shoulder. A half-track sits tilted, its right track off the ground and frozen solid. You can still see 2 handprints smudged on an engine cover where someone tried to get a truck started that just wouldn't turn over. The engine stays cold. Here's the thing. Fuel isn't magic. The German plan counted on capturing fuel depots and moving fast, but instead, columns are crawling through forests on narrow tracks. Every wrong turn costs fuel. Towing anything costs more. In winter, oil thickens, batteries die, and vehicles that stop moving don't start again. Eventually, a column just stays put, forever. An armor breakthrough lives and dies on one simple calculation: fuel consumption, the supply trucks behind you, and whether the roads can actually handle the traffic. In the Ardennes, it's the roads that become the killer. When Lanzerath slows things down, when Elsenborn holds firm, when every small roadblock costs time, the math gets brutal. Engines idle while engineers clear mines. Trucks take 5-mile detours to cover 1 mile. Bridges have weight limits so vehicles have to make 2 trips instead of 1. When Allied planes find good weather, they hammer the choke points. There aren't enough recovery vehicles for broken down tanks, so soldiers blow them up and walk. The German army looked strong on paper, but the supply line was already cracking. Once that fails, the spearhead just stops. No explosion, no drama. It just quits. A young American infantryman passes a German column that's going nowhere. He taps a Panzer with his rifle, more out of habit than anything. It sounds hollow. He pulls his scarf up and keeps moving. There's a crossroad to hold tonight and trucks that need it open. A captain at that crossroad does the math any truck driver would get and tells his men, one more night. That night, artillery paints white lines into the tree line and the trucks get through. Later, when soldiers talk about it, they keep it simple. We didn't break. They did. A medic says that at the end of the month. German reports that promised the Meuse River in days now mention unexpected resistance and fuel shortages. An American officer, asked why the roads are buried in German equipment, shrugs. They ran out of time before they ran out of courage. By late January, that Bulge is back where it started. Hundreds of thousands of shells, 100 miles of front under attack. A week of fighting in a single town. Thousands of people, thousands of choices, thousands of refusals to quit. A confident arrow on a map hits a snowbank and sticks. A timetable met a day that wouldn't move fast enough. It's over. The Germans bet everything on breaking the Americans in winter. They didn't. On roads in the cold, ordinary people found out what they were made of. December 26th in Bastogne. A medic and a nurse stepped outside for a breath of air. One of the Shermans from the relief column rolled past. The driver waved, and Rowe waved back before dropping his hand. Chewie pulled her scarf tighter and looked up at the grey winter sky. Behind them was a cellar full of men who were going to live because that road was finally open. In front of them, just a street corner covered in fresh tank tracks in the snow. Out in the woods, things looked different. The forest was full of destroyed German vehicles, tanks and trucks that weren't going anywhere. A young soldier from the 99th Division walked past them without making a sound. He could hear his boots squeaking in the snow with every step. He could have counted every last destroyed vehicle if he'd wanted to, but instead, he just put his hand on the cold metal of one tank and kept walking. On the map, the front lines had shifted back to almost where they started, looking a lot like early December again, but everything was different now. The Germans had counted on winter to break the Americans, on the cold, the surprise attack, and the sheer overwhelming force. Instead, they found something else entirely. Vernon McGarity dragged the wounded man to safety under enemy fire, even after he ran out of ammunition. Lyle Bouck held a ridge with just 18 men until dawn. Jose Lopez moved a machine gun through smoke to block off a street. Francis Curry pulled 5 men out from under a tank. Eugene Rowe kept bandaging wounds while shells exploded around him, and Augusta Chewie kept going back out again and again to help the wounded. They didn't break.